Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to The Bunker. I'm excited to have another interview lined up for you. Today's guest has spent time in prison, but not for the reasons you might suspect. It's a great pleasure to welcome to the channel, Reggie. Hello, Reggie.
Hello, Lloyd. It's an absolute pleasure to be on the channel.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you. And just to reassure viewers, you haven't robbed any banks or done anything nefarious. We'll get to why you spent time in prison. But can you just give us a rundown of how you came to be involved with Jehovah's Witnesses?
Okay, so I am what we call a born-in, although my mum became a witness when I was 4 years old, and my dad followed suit a year later when I was 5. So that was in France. And I received the education of a Jehovah's Witness. And I remember these studies with my dad. And I became hooked straight away. I mean, from very early, I wanted to be Jehovah's friend. And my ambition, not exaggeration, no exaggeration there, is I wanted to be like Abraham. And my ambition was to become a missionary. I mean, I was one of those kids who were a bit like freaks, I'm afraid. When I had no issue explaining why I couldn't celebrate birthdays. And I was very zealous. I went in the ministry from a very young age, accompanying my dad. And I delivered my first Bible reading age 7. And by 12, I could deliver them without looking at my notes or not having any notes. I had loads of Bible studies, even at school, even not being baptized. I got baptized at the age of 16. I was in a loving congregation. I know it's not always the case for people, but a real good, loving congregation was not for child baptism. So they always held people back a little bit. So I waited till I was 16. I was doing the equivalent of A levels in France. As you can hear, I'm French. So all that happened in France. And as soon as I got baptized, I went into auxiliary pioneering. And if you remember, there was permanent auxiliary pioneering. And at the time, it wasn't 50 hours, it was 60 hours. And as soon as I finished my A levels, I went into regular pioneering, which was 90 hours a month. I never did less. I always did more. From a young age, I was a bit of a freak, like I said, because even at age 3, my mum was telling me that I was speaking like an adult. When people were saying, "Oh, he's a nice little boy," and I said, "Yeah, thank you, nice to meet you, sir, and how are you?" Well, taken aback. And obviously I could transfer that into oratory skills and into the preaching work. So I brought the whole thing. And I was appointed a ministerial servant at age 19 after I came out of prison. But
Right.
I wasn't a snob, but I thought I was right in the right religion. And I must have, no exaggeration either, over 50 Bible studies during that time. And to my great shame now, over 10 people in the truth at the time, including a couple of families. So the preaching work I knew could work. So that's in a nutshell where I gelled, where I fit into the Jehovah's Witness world.
And just to put viewers out of their misery, why did you go to prison?
Because at the time in France, we had compulsory conscription. So when male citizens reach 18, they have a few years to do it, but normally when you reach 18, you are called up. You are normally called up from where you were born, and you will do your 1-year training with the army. Now, unless you had exemptions, like, for example, being in higher education or already having children, where you could delay this a little bit, it made sense for most witnesses, and certainly for me, to get this out of the way as soon as possible, because it does block you in terms of, well, finding a job or keeping a job. And remember, I wanted to go into Gilead. So I thought, let's get this out of the way as soon as possible. So when I received my letter, and they normally give you, at the time, a train ticket, and I had to go all the way, that was quite 5 hours away from where I was living at the time, and to be called up. So I can explain the detail, if you like, because it's quite interesting.
I'm actually very grateful that you can come on the channel and talk about this, because I've spoken about it a few times on the channel, this whole thing of military conscription. Obviously, it's been a big issue until fairly recently in South Korea, where there's been mandatory conscription, and hundreds of Jehovah's Witness men have had to spend, I forget how long, a year and a half, something like that, behind bars over their stand as conscientious objectors. But what isn't reported, or the side of the story that Jehovah's Witnesses don't talk about so much, is the fact that is the extreme to which this position is taken, because I think lots of people can sympathize with the position of conscientious objection. I mean, war's an ugly thing, fighting is an ugly thing, and it would be nice if people could make their own minds up as to what extent they get involved in the military and in fighting. But my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the Jehovah's Witnesses take the position, we won't even let you learn war. So it's not just about the fighting, it's not just about the killing. We object to you learning how to assemble, clean and fire a gun, or, scramble around an assault course, or do any of the basic training that is required of recruits. And it's because of this particular position that Jehovah's Witness men end up in prison. Am I wrong?
So you are right, but I need to unpack a few things, because
Sure.
It's a little bit more subtle than this.
Mm.
The branch advice was as follows: you cannot be under military authority. Therefore, you cannot even wear the military uniform. It also means that you cannot have the conscientious objector status, because you would still come under the military authority. So the advice, which was reinforced by elders when they knew that a member of the congregation had to face this, were prepared in a meeting in the back room of the Kingdom Hall just to make sure that you refuse the conscientious objector status. You have to present yourself when you're being called up, so that you are not a deserter and you submit to the authority. But by refusing the military habit, it will become a crime, and in this case, you come under the judicial authority rather than military authority. And therefore, the sentence was quite clear at the time. It could be up to 2 years in prison. At the time, it was quite accepted by the courts that normally you would get 15 months, 18 months, reduced to 12 months for good behavior. That's what happened to me. I was sentenced to 15 months, but it was reduced for good behavior, obviously, to 12 months. So I'm going to explain the way it happened. So you go on a train, and obviously you have loads of people of the same age group with you, most of them not being witnesses, obviously. And we all go through this conveyor belt when you get to the council. You're being told what the rules are, and then you're given your military uniform. And it's at this point that you've got to make a stand as a witness. So in my case, it was quite clear. When they say, could you put this on? I would say no. So the sergeant just said, well, I'm ordering you, you put military habit now. No. Obviously, they are used to this because of witnesses having been, having acted that way for many years. So straight away, he referred me to the commandant of the camp. So I went there, and as per the convention, there was a witness, was the actual major, was the doctor for the garrison. And the commandant said to me, "You're Jehovah's Witness?" "Yes." "Okay, so I'm ordering you to do military habit." I said, "No." "Okay, so I'm giving you 20 days isolation. So now I'm going to ask you a second time, could you put the military habit?" I said, "No, you have 40 days isolation. Are you going to change your mind?" "No." "Okay, take him away." So it was not horrible to me. It was just applying what the military code was. So I ended up going into this, in the army barracks, if you like, into this prison, which was a separate building, and actually looked like a lot of these prisons you see in Westerns. That was quite old, with just earth on the ground. And that was it. And I had a guard standing outside, and they were all very nice to me. Now, the problem with that is you had to wait until the next court date. It doesn't happen every day. It happened once a month. So depending how lucky you were when you were put in isolation, you could stay there 30 days. And it happened to some brothers. In my case, I was lucky enough, only had to wait 4 or 5 days. And then we were transferred, as a group of us actually, from lots of garrisons around, or barracks around, in one fell swoop, a contingent of 20 young brothers. They were not all brothers, by the way, because you had people who were not baptized. And that was what they wanted to, that was what they needed to do if they wanted to stay within the organization. And we all arrived in the dock, as you can imagine. And the advice, and this is quite disturbing really, the advice from the branch was, you don't need a lawyer, you don't need a barrister, you don't need a solicitor. So when obviously the procurator, if you like, the person who was indicting us was taking the stand, he actually destroyed us, saying, well, these people benefit from the state, they have so many advantages as citizens, it is unacceptable that they do not serve the country, and therefore give them 15 months. And the judge, boom, 15 months, that's it. I mean, he did call us up as per convention, state your name, your age, your address, but really we had no defense. And it was an absolute shambles. And from there, then we were dispatched to the closest prison. But the break was made, which was the point between the military authority. Now we came under the judicial authority, the civil authority, if you like. And then I ended up in a brand new prison that literally had just opened. And it was very, very modern. And I can explain a bit more if you like.
Well, if you'll allow me to kind of give my thoughts on what you've just described. So I find it very telling that you say that you were basically briefed on what your position was by the elders. So straight away we're learning that this isn't your personal decision. This is a decision that's been given to you by religious leaders. And what we're also learning is that it's not to do with fighting and violence per se. It's about whose authority are you coming under, because you've already explained that you can be in the military as a conscientious objector. They just don't want you wearing the uniform, and they don't want you answering to the military. They want you only answering to them. So it's kind of manifestly an issue of control and, well, it's pedantic, isn't it? It's semantics really as to whose quote unquote authority you fall under. The real issue should be, are you fighting and taking human life, or are you not fighting and taking human life? And it seems that the military, as in so many countries, were making it possible for you to be a conscientious objector and do something that didn't involve fighting.
So that's absolutely correct. And the thinking, because there is a thinking behind, obviously, the branch's advice, which comes from the governing body, is even if you did accept the conscientious objector status, which is designed for people who don't want to fight actively in the war, the thinking was there is no guarantee if there was a conflict, in case a conflict happened, that you wouldn't still be drafted to actually do the assault course and fight. So that was
Mexico, Malawi.
Just to make sure.
I'm straight away thinking of Mexico, Malawi, where Mexican brothers were encouraged to bribe officials to get a Cartier card, which meant that they were in that country's reserves.
Yes, you could say that, and I completely agree. But the thinking is you must really get from under the military authority to make sure that if anything happens, you're not called up to fight, which is completely wrong, because the conscientious objector status literally says you're not going to fight, you're going to do something else, and ancillary work, and maybe some humanitarian work. But the idea as well was to be actually crossed off the military list, because the conscientious objector was for 2 years. And also, if you went to prison, we knew that you would, at the most, stay there for 18 months. But at least you were completely radiated, crossed off a military list. Because it happened in the past that people could be called up again. And it happened to some brothers as well.
Are you not?
And then the whole process will carry on again.
Are you not bitter about this, though? Because, as an outsider looking in, what we have here is an organization that's obsessed with appearances and obsessed with what ifs. I mean, so what if you get called up? You can still say no. It's almost like just the simple act of getting called up is tantamount to you fighting. Well, the two are not the same thing. We're talking here about you being deprived of your freedom as a human being for a year or more. And if I were in your position, being required to sit in a cell and not be able to interact with society for over a year just to tick a few boxes, and nothing to do with whether you're actually fighting and taking human life or not, just purely to tick the right boxes in terms of what your status is and what circumstances you're in. It's going above and beyond anything you see in the Bible, surely. And if I were in your shoes, I would be absolutely enraged at having to lose all of that time in my young life when I could have been doing so many other things.
That's absolutely true. At the time, if you wanted to remain within the congregation, you had no choice. You had to follow the direction. And am I enraged about it? Well, I don't tend to be a bitter person, but I'm annoyed. I'm annoyed because once you obviously go to prison under the judicial authority, you have a criminal record. So I have a criminal record, which means that as soon as I went out, I could not do any civil service work. Even being a postman was completely barred from me. And arguably the best time of my life, I didn't enjoy it. There were some good times in prison when, if I try to be as positive as I can, but what a waste of time. And you're absolutely correct. And we did not save appearances because it all was a shambles. But when you are brainwashed, I don't like to say brainwashed, it's not the correct term, but when we believe that we're in the truth, and this is an imperfect world, and people at the top, the direction, they know better, and this is what we got to go through because this is what we've been doing for decades, in this case in France. And look what happened to Nazi Germany, and look what happened in Italy at the time, which was another example. Then you just do it. You just fall in the ranks of the organization. And yes, it is an absolute shame. It's an absolute waste of time. Just to give you an idea, I stayed in the first prison for 5 months. I could go into the nitty-gritty of what the conditions were because it's quite enlightening as well. We can talk about this in a minute if you want. But I was transferred to another prison closer to home. And we had to transit through a second prison. So from prison A, transit for a couple of days to a huge prison in Paris, and then go down to a prison closer to where I used to live, called Lyon, and that prison was in Saint-Étienne. It's called La Talaudière, very famous in France. So that would have been much easier. The idea was to get closer to my parents so they could come and visit me, because when I was in prison A, they could only visit me. They had 2 other kids, which were very young, so my 2 sisters, they only came once. So obviously, going closer to home would have a benefit. Plus, as it turned out, the conditions were much better for young brothers like us. So during that transfer, I ended up in Lyon, in one of the main railway stations, being chained up like this, but also with your feet, going exactly by where I used to work, like a chain of people, and with dogs and loads of police with machine guns in front of a packed railway station. So imagine the shame of having to go there. And I was thinking, oh, I used to work there. I hope that they're not seeing me, because they're going to believe that I've committed a kind of crime. So yeah, it is shameful.
Again, it's just, well, it is fanatical, isn't it? It's such an extreme position to take, and again, all just for the simple, just for a box ticking exercise. There's no other way of putting it. You know, are you fighting or are you not fighting? Are you taking human life or are you not taking human life? This is an organization that isn't so much bothered about that. They're more interested in appearances, and they're more interested in whether you're wearing a uniform or not. And the Bible verses don't talk about whether you're wearing a uniform or who you're answering to. You know, beating swords into plowshares, well, that's about being peaceful, isn't it? And the French government was giving you an opportunity to be peaceful as an official conscientious objector, but you were being barred from being an official conscientious objector by the organization because they didn't like it. And it's easy for them to come up with these rules as free people sitting in their offices in Brooklyn or in the French branch or what have you. But, you know, these have real effects on the ground, and you were deprived of your youth in a very visceral and tangible way for what, a year? I would be livid, but you seem to be taking it very well.
Well, I mean, adding to what you're saying, do you remember when I explained when I faced the camp commandant?
Mm-hmm.
One of the arguments he gave me was, but you know, I am a Christian too, and I want to do God's word. I want to follow God's law. But the Bible says that Cornelius was in ministry. So there was no idea of here not being a centurion. So whether he was active or not, he was still a centurion. He was still wearing the military habit. There is nothing to say that Cornelius, just before his baptism and the Holy Spirit came to him, said, well, I'm not wearing this anymore. The Bible is silent about this. So it is absolutely true. And I couldn't answer about this. I just couldn't answer it. I just said, well, I'm not worried, because that was the mindset and the instructions that were given to us. And we were drilled, no pun intended, but we were drilled before being called up by the elders, saying that this is what you should say, this is what you should refuse, and that's it. Just do your thing.
Yeah. And again, this wasn't your decision, and you were even deprived a lawyer. So, yeah. So the fact that you're still...
Funny enough, remember when I was telling you that we ended up about 20 of us in the dock. Well, there was one brother who had a lawyer because his dad insisted. Didn't change anything. But at least they made the point, they had a lawyer. He got the same. But so at least we know that at least one brother within the 20s who were there represented in the dock, one of them, his dad said, no, I'm still going to have a lawyer. But that was the exception rather than the rule.
Okay, fair enough. So after this experience, were you kind of given a hero's welcome by the religion for having done your 1 year in jail?
So it was the tradition during meetings and during prayers to always have a thought about our brothers who are in chains. So yes, you are not treated as a hero, you just did what you had to do, and that was it. That was it. And yes, you could be shown as an example, but that wasn't the exception. That happened to many brothers before me, and that happened to brothers after me. I would say, thank goodness, the law in France changed in 1995, 1996. Conscription was not on the cards anymore and was replaced now by what we call a citizenship day. So there's no issue with neutrality in France about this anymore. But French brothers had to deal with this for decades, and I'm glad that they don't have to. However, I feel sad that in many other countries, like in Korea, which is South Korea that you mentioned, and other countries, we're still having this issue, and with extra rules being put on youngsters. And yes, it is robbing you of your life, of your childhood, say of your best years as a young man, and it needn't be. It's not necessary.
It's all avoidable, and again, just about a box ticking exercise, just about the details of, what are you wearing and whose authority are you coming under? Okay, so what was next for you? It sounds like before this prison experience, you'd been on almost like this upwards trajectory of being involved more and more in the organization. So did that continue after you returned from being in prison?
Yes, it did. So the body of elders in my congregation preferred to appoint young men as ministerial servants after they'd been through the 1 year in prison, although it wasn't the same for every congregation. So I was appointed as a ministerial servant. I carried on with regular pioneering, and then my congregation being quite spiritual, quite strong, and not much need, I realized that there wasn't a lot I could do really in terms of getting appointed for example, as an elder. I was way too young, or even doing the preaching work we were rehashing the same territory over and over and over and over and over again. So the branch advised me, because I wrote to the branch, and they advised me, said, look, if you want to go to Gilead, the best thing for you is to become fluent in English. And in order to avoid the cultural shock as well, that not just the language barrier, but they also the cultural shock with Anglo-Saxon mentality and way of life, spend a few years in the UK. This is what you should be doing. Learn the language, carry on pioneering, and then you can apply to Gilead. That's what I did. So through the grapevine, I learned of some brothers in the UK, in Plymouth at the time, or a family that was quite willing to have me as a lodger, and so I could actually come over and carry on, get integrated into a new congregation, which I did. So I was 21, and I came there as a pioneer and straight away as a ministerial servant. It took me, so I stayed 6 months. There's a bit of a story there. I was quite the sensation when I arrived in the congregation, I can tell you that. And it was quite funny, really funny, because the first time I gave a talk in my very broken English at the time, everybody was lining up. I won't say everybody, a lot of youngsters of the female kind.
Oh, I see. I get you. I get
Oh
you.
yes, oh yes. And I'm talking about from very, very young to not so young.
You were having to beat them off with your briefcase, weren't you? Let's be honest. Come on. You can be honest here on
And
the Lloyd Evans
they were
channel.
lining up to, do you remember that was pre-smartphones when you were making appointments to go to the ministry? So I always had someone who wanted to go in the ministry with me.
Okay.
And my eye got attracted to a young lady. Was actually
just your eye, or was any other part of you? But no, I'm joking. Carry on.
Absolutely. The thing is, she was 11 years older than me, and she'd already been married, so she was divorced, strictly divorced. She'd been in the truth and come back, so she was not exactly what I would consider strong spiritual material, but I just fell in love. And although I'd already refused relationships in France with interested parties who I judged how snobbish, I would say, in that case, I just were not compatible material to me, not because they were not pretty, they were, but I thought, well, now a pioneer, or even there was a pioneer was interested in me, and I thought, yeah, but I want to go to Gilead, and my mind was really set on this since age 5. But when I came to England, I saw this lovely sister. I thought, oh, well, I just fell in love. Sometimes you can't help that. And we started courting. Didn't work out. I went back to France after 6 months, completely heartbroken, carried on pioneering. But it was in my mind, I want to go back. I want to marry. I want to win her back. And actually, I went back 6 months later, and I won her back. I shouldn't have, but I did. The elders in the congregation, because I ended up in the same congregation in the UK, in Plymouth, I remember one elder taking me to one side. Dear elder, really, he was really nice. Said, "Are you sure?" It was, if I were you, I'd be very careful here. And boy, was he right. But anyway, we ended up getting married. Now, I did the unthinkable. We had sex before getting married.
Naughty, naughty.
Temptation was there. Naughty, naughty. She had a daughter who was 7 years of age as well. So I was taking over an already formed family. Boy, was I badly equipped as a very innocent, really I was, really innocent young man who knew nothing about life, to take over someone who already had quite a lot of problems. Anyway, we knew that we did something wrong, and I wanted to say something to the elders. We both did, but because we wanted to get married at the hall, we kept it quiet for a month, and because we did the deed, not straight away. I mean, just we were engaged already, so it's not as if we were playing the field or anything like that. But I waited till the marriage ceremony at the Kingdom Hall had happened, and then I went to the elders, knowing perfectly well that I did wrong and expecting to lose my responsibilities, which happened. And I took it on the chin, and I knew I did wrong, and that was it.
Okay, so you were reproved.
I was reproved. We were both reproved. But obviously, as a male, then I could not carry on pioneering or being a minister servant. So that was fine with me. It was heartbreaking. I must say, it was quite heartbreaking to me as well. And my ex-wife, because we're divorced now, I realized it as well. I felt bad about the fact that I was losing my ambition and my childhood dreams by taking on a young family. We did actually at the time entertain the idea of going to serve in Ireland when the need was greater. We actually had a trip there, but it wasn't something that was workable for her and our young child. So I was quite heavy-hearted about it. Anyway, I lost my responsibilities. And now the problems really started with the marriage. The marriage, I can tell you, was probably one of the worst in history. It was very volatile. And it's not because I didn't try to apply Bible principles as much as I could, but there were underlying issues here which were more in terms of the mental kind that affected my ex-wife, and there was quite a lot of emotional instability from my part, also from hers, but also more for the mental side. And I realized, and this is important to me, I realized that Bible principles can only go so far. So within the first
well, when you say
3
Bible,
years,
you say Bible principles, they're really Jehovah's Witness principles, aren't they? Because, you know, we're talking about the Jehovah's Witnesses interpreting the Bible their own way, really.
Absolutely. So, I mean, right from the get-go, from honeymoon, really from the honeymoon, it was a very acrimonious relationship. And I was absolutely distraught about it. I could not understand. I don't drink, I don't smoke. I try as much as I can to provide. I treat my wife, I worshipped her, so to speak. I try my best with my stepdaughter. Why isn't it working? In the first 3 years of relationship, we actually separated for 2 at different intervals. And because I lived in her house, she felt it was in her right to throw me out of the house whenever she wasn't happy. And that happened a few times. So I persisted in my mind thinking, what do I do here? There is no infidelity, so I can't get a scriptural divorce. I should still be exemplary. So is separation the right way? Well, no, because then I'm not scripturally free to remarry. I'm trying to apply what I considered were scriptural principles, which, as we explained, were more the cult principle or the Jehovah's Witnesses interpretation of what the principles would be in matrimonial disputes or matrimonial types of issues. But anyway, my wife and I, ex-wife and I, eventually patched up. And we patched up for the simple reason that I found a new career into sales, being self-employed, which was quite risky. It was commission only. I started to become very successful in that career, which involved speaking to people door to door.
Yeah.
So I had an
transferable skills there from the cult. Yeah.
That's exactly what it was. And in fact, funny enough, the way this organization worked was very, very similar to Jehovah's Witnesses. And I could see how the Jehovah's Witnesses model was actually mirroring commercial organizations, because we had very, very similar. We had our own conventions. We had the type of hierarchy, which was very, very similar to what it was in the Jehovah's Witnesses organization. Anyway, so I became successful. My wife was reassured in my ability to be a provider, and we decided to give it a fresh go in another congregation in Plymouth. Then I was appointed by my work as a manager within 6 months, and eventually we moved to a different congregation. But something happened. Something happened in terms of me realizing I was not in the truth. Would you like me to explain?
That's why you're here, Reggie. That's why you're here.
Okay, so the first important thing was realizing emotionally something happened to me. Applying the Bible principles as they were given to me did not work. And to say, well, still patched up together. But no, we went back together, but it was not a good relationship. It did not work. We were not happy. But if you remember, because I'm going back a few years now, 1995, 1997, especially 1997, we had a flip-flop or a new interpretation about generation. Now, I remember that a couple of years prior to this, when I was so zealous and when I was a regular pioneer and when I was a minister servant and I was actually engaged to my now ex-wife, I was saying to her, but how would you know that you're going to remain faithful? Now, how arrogant of me, right? And I said to her, what if there is a new interpretation of our generation? Because that's the only thing I could change in my view in terms of 1914. So I could see that maybe the interpretation about the word generation, that would be the only hinge on which the organization could change and still retain the 1914 teaching. So I said to her, would you remain faithful? And she said, oh, yes, I would. Obviously, we were thinking emotionally, romantically. But when I was faced with that Watchtower study, and I realized, actually, generation, well, it could be a longer span than what it was. I thought straight away, it's as if, the scales came out of my eyes.
Moving the goalposts.
And I realized,
and the generation teaching changed, I think, 2 or 3 times until it settled on what it is now, which is the overlapping generation teaching, which is just outrageous. So, yeah.
Okay, but as far as I was concerned, to me, it was instant. Instantly, I understood it wasn't the truth at that point, because it was the combination of what happened to me in my marriage and the fact that I could kind of predict that the generation teaching would actually change. And I haven't got the direction of the Holy Spirit. So if I was able to see that for me, it stood to reason that it was man-made. And straight away, I decided it wasn't the truth. Now, I didn't want to get disfellowshipped. As I said, we moved quite a long way away, and we decided to fade. And I never looked back. So for me, it was a successful fade. And I remember, you see, Lloyd, when I realized, and I know we're all different, we all have different journeys, but in my case, as soon as I realized this is man-made, I literally remember what I felt. I really felt that a weight was taken off my shoulders. And I remember thinking then, wow, the truth did set me free, but not the way I thought it would do.
Okay.
And by the time the new generation teaching was given, I was already out for many years.
Sure. So you, it sounds like, have been out of the organization for quite some time now.
Since 1987.
Since 1997. Okay. And obviously, I mean, the organization's changed a lot just in the time that I've been out. I stopped going to meetings in 2010. Here we are in 2021, and it's almost completely different religion just since then. So goodness knows what it must be like for you to be tuning into JW Broadcasting and seeing what's become of the religion since you left.
Well, that's so obvious, and that's the religion of my youth is not the one that is now being portrayed by JW Broadcasts. I'd like to maybe nuance this a little bit. I mean, the main tenets haven't changed that much. But what has become obvious is what I would call the radicalization of the thinking. There's always been an emphasis on obedience and trust in the governing body, but they were not that visible, as you know. I remember in my younger days when a member of the governing body came to France, for example, or even came to the UK, we had a specially rented stadium to be able to listen to this talk from the governing body. It was something, but they were not really visible, so these were extraordinary occasions. But now, when we see that these people are not really bright, it really makes you think. And all those different flip-flops, because you know very well, and your channel exposes it very well, that some of the new light is in fact something that was quite old. So yeah. It's completely unrecognizable. But really, for me, the point is the radicalization, the hardening of the control, but it's something to me that's quite obvious.
Wow. Well, Reggie, I'm really glad that you could join me, because I talk about this, particularly this issue of conscientious objection. I've talked about it a few times. I've just never really had someone on the channel who has first-hand experience, and what you've shared kind of confirms pretty much what I've been saying to my viewers now for a few years, which is that it's really a token gesture. and young Jehovah's Witness men have been forced into this situation where they get deprived of their freedom for a year or more. Would you say that this experience, in other words, the prison experience, and perhaps the Jehovah's Witness approach to higher education, would you say that set you back at all in life?
Oh, completely. I mean, I was a straight A student right from the get-go, and when I told my teachers I wouldn't go to university, they were flabbergasted. And I can tell you for a fact, in my life, it's put me back a lot. I struggled for many, many years, although I went into sales, but that didn't last forever. I mean, it lasted 10 years. I found it very difficult to get a good job and to get a job where I would be happy and be thriving into. And I had to go to higher education later on in life to be able to bridge that gap. So there is that. In terms of the prison experience, well, not only it gives you a criminal record, but also it robs you from your freedom, but it stays with you. I mean, there are lots of things I dream about even now. I still sometimes have bad dreams about it, and I've got flashbacks. Oh, this happened, and some of the times there were actually very, very difficult. I mean, I could explain a little bit the interactions between brothers and the way we organized. So, for example, if you want me to, I can explain.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so obviously the French penal system understood that Jehovah's Witnesses were not like every other prisoner. We went there because we robbed the bank or because we were murderers. So they kept us separate from the rest of the carceral population. So that was true for every prison. Now, it could very well be that when you were first transferred from the military into the carceral population, that for a time you could share a cell with the other prisoners, but generally you would be transferred back with the brothers. And brothers had privileges in prison. We were used as cheap labor. So, for example, as you know, it's the same in France as in every country. The underfunding of the prison system is dire. So the prison authorities would use the brothers as much as they could to do a lot of the tasks they wouldn't trust all the prisoners to do. That would be, obviously, because we had, I won't say the run of the prison, but we were trusted. So we could have access to mail delivery, quite a lot of the cleaning jobs, going into the kitchen. So there were prisoners were going to the kitchen, but to give you an example, for the officers' mess, or I would say the warden's mess, that wasn't trusted to criminals. Brothers would do it, and the supervision of the contractor was coming in. And so I had different jobs like that, and you were paid. It was good to have a job in a way because it would take you out of the prison cell. I mean, you go back into the cell at the end of your day. We had an hour or two where the floor, if you like, was open. So the floor was closed, but we could go from cell to cell. At a certain time, we would go back in. It was good to have a job. We were paid, like, at time, 20 francs per month, to tell you how cheap the labor was. So I was lucky to do different jobs. I started, like most people, most brothers did actually, into the cleaning service. And that was horrible. I remember one day, and I hope no one's eating when they're listening to this. There was a big problem with the plumbing. And bear in mind that, so that was in the third prison, the second prison really, where I was there full time. Something was not right with plumbing and needed to be investigated. So who could do it? Jehovah's Witnesses. So we had the warden who was in charge of us saying, okay, you need to go in a septic tank and by hand see what the issue is. So we opened the hole. I mean, remember, I'd never done anything of the sort. With obviously a cable, we had to go and pull what the issue was. I mean, I didn't even have a mask or anything. It was something quite indescribable, because you're talking about hundreds of people using the same facilities, going into one point over months, years.
A lot of poo. It's a lot of poo.
Oh my God. And okay, I had gloves, but I was covered. Okay. So I started pulling, and so we could see the whole menu for the week. We could see the chips, we could see maybe a bit of chicken. So we're looking at that.
Sweet corn. You'd have the sweet corn in there, wouldn't you?
That was my day.
Yeah.
Started pulling, and we saw a jumper. A jumper, that means that someone in the carceral population had put the jumper down the toilet. No wonder there was a blockage. But then we pulled again. A pair of jeans. Then we pulled again. Oh, a pair of trainers. I thought, if I pull again, I'm going to see a body in a minute. So eventually that cleared the blockage. But that was not a very pleasant experience. I laugh about it now, but really, it wasn't very nice at all. The interactions between brothers, bear in mind, we're all youngsters. And so I'm not saying it was Lord of the Flies, but things did not always work out well between brothers. So, just to give you an idea, when I first, went into a cell in the first prison that was brand new, there already were 2 people in the cell. So I ended up on the floor for a few weeks, waiting for someone else to vacate a cell where they finished their time, so I could be reassigned. And generally, you would not stay with the same cellmate for the duration. I must have had like 10 or 12 different ones, because people came and went. But sometimes things didn't go well, because you could end up with someone you get on with. Sometimes you don't get on. And I remember in the first cell I joined, there was a lovely, lovely young brother, but there was another one who was not a brother. And also he was not lovely, but he was very, very difficult to live with. And we had arguments. And I remember, you have to use toilets, which in front of everyone, you're not used to that. And imagine the prudish mentality that we as Jehovah's Witnesses have been actually brought up in. Well, you had to learn to poo in front of someone. Now, it's quite funny, because sometimes you would hold it in as much as you could, hoping that either they were out and then you could have a bit of privacy. But sometimes, in the end of the day, you had to learn. And I remember, because being youngsters and being pranksters at some time, I know in another cell what they did, and they had a newcomer like this who had the same issue. And it'd been days, and they realized, we can't stay like that, he's going to make himself ill. So what they organized was, they knew that the brother in question, the newcomer, would wait at night when everyone was asleep to use the facility. I say facility when you're talking about just, you can imagine in the corner there is a toilet. And just to give you an idea, a cell is, when you do this, you touch both walls. And you're talking about 3 meters long. So 3 meters long, and when you do this, you touch it. And it's 3 of us in there, right? Bunk beds, and I had a spare kind of, the mattress, but spare something to sleep on. Anyway, what they did to that brother, they waited for him to go to the toilet, and they all went to him, da! And that was a good thing for him, because he had to learn, say, look, don't hold it in, just do it like everybody else.
Okay. Well,
but sometimes there were more serious things. So we normally would have an elder who would act as a chaplain, who would visit the brothers generally once a month. But during that month, you're still in each other's space. Sometimes one of the brothers could be minister or servant, but more often than not they went. But sometimes they were, and they were given a little bit of authority. But they were not elders, and they could not act as elders. So I remember cases of bullying between brothers. It affected me. I mean, it really, I went into depression whilst being in prison because of the bullying situation.
Well, I was going to ask
And
about your mental health, because, given what you've been through, surely all of this must have been very taxing on your mental health.
it really was. It really was. I mean, not everyone reacted the same. I had bouts of depression while I was in prison, but saying that, I had depressive tendencies because of my upbringing, which was to do with my home life. So that came to the surface, and I had some difficult times. I came out of it while I was in prison, but it was really, really difficult. And I was not the only one, by the way, because you had times, I remember some brothers were courting, on the stage of courting someone when they were called up. And we were waiting for the post, like anything. Post delivery was so important. So I know that some of the brothers received some very nice letters from some members of the congregation, and they were obviously waiting for letters from their ladies of the heart or from their fiancés. And sometimes the fiancée decided she didn't want to court anymore.
Yeah.
And that was absolutely known, I would say. These brothers who had to deal with the breakup at the same time as being incarcerated and deprived from their freedom. It's absolutely terrible. So we tried as much as we could to support each other, but things didn't always work.
Sure. Well, Reggie, again, fascinating insights into this aspect of the Jehovah's Witness religion, which, again, you sort of know the theory behind it, but it's nice to have a first-hand testimony. And I really appreciate you sharing what you've shared. I don't know whether you've seen any of my interviews on this channel before, but I always ask former Jehovah's Witnesses to give a message to anyone watching who might be, for example, a Jehovah's Witness who's on the fence about their beliefs. What I'd like you to do is do that, but in French. Is that possible?
Mes chers frères, mes chères sœurs, je comprends qu'il est difficile de concevoir de ne pas être dans la véritable religion. Et je ne suis pas là pour essayer de vous déconvertir. Simplement, dans mon cas personnel, je me suis aperçu qu'il n'y a pas de véritable religion. Et je me suis également aperçu que si vous êtes dans une relation matrimoniale qui est toxique, échappez-vous. Parce que ça ne servira à rien d'essayer d'appliquer ce que le collège central conçoit comme étant les directives de l'Esprit Saint pour faire fonctionner un mariage. Si un mariage est toxique, on peut essayer de le réparer, mais si après plusieurs années, et si la relation est abusive, toxique, il n'y a pas d'amélioration, ça ne sert à rien de rester, et ça devient même toxique pour les enfants. Je l'ai vu avec mes parents, qui étaient dans la vérité, et qui sont toujours dans la vérité. Le fait qu'ils soient restés ensemble dans une relation toxique m'a vraiment affecté, a affecté mes sœurs. Et cela nous a fait beaucoup plus de mal que de bien. Et cela n'a pas été bénéfique pour notre santé. Donc ça, c'est ce dont je me suis aperçu. L'autre chose, c'est que faire des recherches est très très important. Parce que les recherches indépendantes, pour vérifier ce que dit le collège central, permet d'ouvrir les yeux. Et une chose qui est très facile à voir, c'est de vérifier si Jérusalem a vraiment été détruite en 607 avant notre ère ou pas. Que disent les historiens? Une fois qu'on fait des recherches indépendantes, sans a priori, on s'aperçoit que les témoins de Jéhovah sont les seuls au monde à défendre l'idée que Jérusalem a été détruite en 607 avant notre ère. Et les raisons données ne sont pas correctes et vont à l'encontre de l'histoire et de ce que disent les historiens à ce sujet. Donc il faut vérifier. Après ça, c'est vraiment comme vous voulez. Mais c'est ce que je vous conseillerais de faire.
Merci, Reggie. C'est magnifique. That was excellent.
You're very welcome.
So, yeah, once again, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us here on the Lloyd Evans channel.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Lloyd.
So viewers, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. I certainly have. Don't forget that you can watch similar videos by subscribing to the Lloyd Evans channel, but that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for watching.